Hi everybody, welcome back. In the last video, we introduced our subfield of economics called welfare economics, where we're thinking about the economic well-being associated with any given outcome or any given allocation of resources. We introduced the idea of consumer and producer surplus and willingness to pay, and ended by showing that the demand curve is made up of everybody's willingness to pay all of these marginal buyers. Here we only had 4, but as you have more and more, you're going to have more and more steps, and eventually you're going to have a nice smooth demand curve. Okay, we're going to carry on with this idea and use that to talk about consumer surplus. Okay, our definition of consumer surplus is the amount a buyer is willing to pay minus the amount they actually pay. The amount a buyer is willing to pay minus the amount they actually pay. Okay, and so their willingness to pay minus what they actually pay. Pause for a minute and try to think about what is the amount somebody actually pays. That is the price. Okay, and that gives us our first important formula for this section. Consumer surplus is willingness to pay minus price. Okay, and so to use our same example from the last video, let's suppose that we have the same people, the same willingness to pay, and the price is $260. Okay, so what is Flea's consumer surplus? That's going to be his willingness to pay, $300, minus the price, $260. So the consumer surplus is $40. And I should, again, note, consumer surplus is measured in dollars. Okay, we could think about what's everybody else's consumer surplus. Well, if the price is $260, Flea is the only one who's going to buy it. It's too expensive for Anthony, and it's too expensive for Chad and John. So Flea's the only one buying it. So because they're not buying it, they receive no consumer surplus. So the total consumer surplus is just, in this case, Flea's consumer surplus, which is $40. Okay, let's take a different example where more people are going to get involved here. But first, let's see how this looks graphically. So remember, this $300 was Flea's willingness to pay. And if the price is $260, let's call it there, then that difference, the difference between the price he pays and the price he's willing to pay, that box there is Flea's consumer surplus. Okay, so he is better off because the price is lower than what he would be willing to pay. So in terms of kind of economic well-being, Flea has $40 worth of economic well-being. And in this case, that's the area. That's that area of that little box. Normally it's not a box, but we'll get to that. Okay, now let's change the price. Instead of being $260, let's suppose the price is $220. So Flea, consumer surplus, willingness to pay minus price. He's still willing to pay $300. Now the price is only $220. So Flea has a consumer surplus of $80. And Anthony, he's willing to pay $250. He has to pay $220, so he's better off by $30. And the total surplus is just the addition of everybody's surplus in the economy. We have 80 plus 30 for a total surplus of 110. And we can represent that as well. The price is 220. That should be a little bit around there. Now, same thing, this bigger box here, that's Flea's consumer surplus. And this smaller box here is going to be Anthony's consumer surplus. And the entire thing, which I'll do in, let's do it in blue. This entire box, or whatever shape that is, upside down Oklahoma, is total surplus. Consumer surplus. Total consumer surplus. Okay, and so here we can see as we add more and more people, the way that we're calculating consumer surplus is by whatever is under the demand curve at that price, the market price, from 0 to whatever the quantity demanded is at that price. Okay, so that's our little lesson here. Let's go ahead and write that down. Total consumer surplus is the area under the demand curve above the price from 0, whoops, getting ahead of myself, from 0 to the quantity demanded. Okay, that gives us consumer surplus. And in this case, we're taking the area under the curve as rectangles. But in reality, once we have a larger number of buyers and sellers, well, in just buyers in this case, we're going to have a much smoother demand curve. And so, for example, the quantity demanded here is right here at quantity demanded 5. There is some buyer here at this price that buyer is willing to jump into the market. That's just like Flea. This is now a different market for shoes. Flea was willing to jump into the market at 300. Okay, and then it went down, and then Anthony was in, and then Chad was in, and then John was in. Same thing is happening here. We have loads of little different buyers. So somebody's jumping in at 50, somebody's jumping in at 30, and we're going to use this price of 30 to talk about what would be the total consumer surplus. What would be the total consumer surplus if the price is 30? So remember, consumer surplus is the area between the price and demand curve from 0 to Q. And so that is this area here, consumer surplus. And to do that, we can just take the area of that triangle. The base of that triangle here is 15. The height of that triangle here goes from 30 to 60. So that's a height of 30. And going back to some geometry, the height of a triangle is equal to 1/2 the base times the height. And in this case, we can calculate that by 1/2. The base is 15. The height is 30. And 30 is in dollars. And that'll come out to $225. So consumer surplus here is $225 if the price is 30. Okay, What we're going to do next is talk about what happens when the price changes. What happens to consumer surplus when the price changes. So same example, but let's suppose that the price rises from 30 to 40. In doing so, we're now going to be here. Total consumer surplus is going to be this triangle here. Okay, and so first we can go ahead and calculate that. That's the area of that triangle. It has a base of 10, a height of 20. So half of 10 times 20 is equal to $100. Okay, but what happened to this surplus? So it's going to be broken out into two separate reasons. Some of the surplus is gone here, and we're gonna call this reason number 1. And some of the surplus is gone from there, and that's reason number 2. Okay, now what are the reasons here? Remember, the demand curve is made up of individuals, marginal individuals. There's somebody here who, let's do it here. There's somebody here willing to pay 50, right? Beforehand, they had to pay $30, so that one person had a consumer surplus of $20. They're willing to pay 50. They only had to pay 30 initially, so they had a consumer surplus of $20. 50 minus 30. But now they're still willing to pay $50, but now the price is $40. Okay, and so now they still have a consumer surplus, but it's only 10 instead of 20. And so for reason number 1, we have people who they're still in the market, they're still buying the good, but they just have less surplus than they had before. Okay, and so this reason number 1 is due to remaining buyers paying higher prices. So that's one reason consumer surplus is lower. People are less well off because they're paying a higher price. Reason number 2, so we had somebody here, let's say here, that they were willing to pay $35, and that person was receiving some surplus. They were receiving $5 of surplus. But now that the price has increased to $40, they are no longer willing to buy anymore, so they are out of the market. These people all along here who were receiving consumer surplus are no longer receiving consumer surplus because they're not even in the market anymore. And so the second reason is due to buyers leaving the market. Okay, and so we see a fall in consumer surplus when prices rise, and that is due to these two reasons here. Okay, so last of all, I'm going to leave you with this, and I'm going to put the answers in the description, but I want you to, before you peek, go out and look at this problem, try to figure it out. Start with a price of $30. Okay, and then now the price is going to fall, so we're actually going to see an increase in consumer surplus. But I want you to calculate the initial consumer surplus here, and then the new consumer surplus, including the new buyers entering the market, the existing buyers paying a lower price, which is here, And the new buyers, all of these people along here, are now receiving consumer surplus because they're now priced into the market. So part A, calculate the marginal buyer's willingness to pay at Q equals 10. That's this guy here. You can kind of see the answer to that one pretty easily. Then find this consumer surplus and see how much consumer surplus increases due to the new buyers entering the market. This is part C, and this is part D. This is part B. And this guy is part A. Okay, so think about that. Try to calculate that. And I will leave the answers in the description. But if you have questions, feel free to write it in the comments or get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to answer that. Thanks, everybody. In the next video, we're going to be looking at producer surplus and starting to look at the seller side of the market. I'll see you then. Thanks.